Crawford here with you on this Thursday morning, September 17th. It's 9:08, and it's time for the latest edition of What's the Word, the radio broadcast that brings you news of Area 1. And now here's the host of What's the Word, Mr. Frank Fisher of the USAG Red Cloud and Area 1 Public Affairs Office.
Thank you, Sergeant Crawford. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of What's the Word. This morning, we look at a topic that is truly a matter of life and death, and that is suicide and how to help prevent it. And here with insights on that today is the Area 1 Chaplain, Chaplain David Mavando of United States Army Garrison, Red Cloud, and Area 1. And we'll talk with him in a moment, but first let me just bring the topic into quick focus. You know, it's possible that one day you can find yourself with someone who is or who may be suicidal. It might be a battle buddy, a civilian, it could be anyone. And you may very well be the only person at that moment whose actions will make the difference for that person between life and death, between whether they continue living or are gone from us forever, gone from their buddies, gone from their unit, from their spouses, their children, their relatives, their friends. So today, we'll tell you the three main actions you should always be ready to take. Here they are. 1, directly but calmly ask the person whether he or she is thinking of suicide. 2, listen closely and give that person a chance to talk about what's got them upset. And 3, rather than leaving him or her alone, take the person to a health facility, escort them to a chaplain, to their unit leadership, or some other place where trained professionals can take it from there. The Army, by the way, sums all this up in a 3-letter word, ACE, A-C-E, Ask, Care, Escort. Now, about the asking part, here's what the ACE training tells us. First thing to do, have the courage to ask the question directly. Ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? But ask it calmly. Well, let's join our guest, Chaplain Mavando, for much more insight onto this subject. Chaplain, what is the especially important thing for people to remember about this asking part of suicide prevention? And you might tell us a little bit about what to look for and even why this is such an important topic.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Suicide is a serious matter in the U.S. military. Starting in 2011, we lost about 283 service members. 2012, we lost 349 service members. 2013, 286, and 2014, 288. As we look at those numbers, actually starting in 2012, 2013, the U.S. military has actually lost more service members to suicide than to combat, battlefield combat. So as we look at that, this is pretty serious. It's very, very serious. So coming back to your question, ask why is it important that you ask the question? Suicide is considered a taboo topic, so most people are uncomfortable talking about suicide. So the soldier struggling with suicide knows that. So that's why a lot of people struggling with suicide don't want to come out and tell you, hey, I'm thinking of committing suicide. Why? They feel very uncomfortable with it, and they don't know that you are comfortable talking about it. So asking that question and asking directly, like we said, not going around, hey, are you thinking of hurting yourself, or what you're telling them is this: first of all, I'm comfortable talking about this. Let's talk about it. I'm open, I'm comfortable, let's talk about it. The second message you're sending them by asking the question is, I care. And that's very important. I care about you, and I want to talk about this. So you are inviting them to open up and talk about this issue. So very important.
Right. And the importance of being very direct and not beating around the bush. Do you want to say a little more about that?
Yes, sir. One thing, though, if you are not direct with the person who is suicidal, what you're telling that person is, well, I don't feel comfortable talking about this. And that you don't want to do. First of all, the person who is struggling with suicidal ideations really doesn't have a lot of options. At least they feel like they don't have a lot of options. They don't have too many people to talk to. So you gotta be able to ask them directly, not feel, you gotta feel comfortable with it.
Being very direct about it really just sort of makes that connection with them, and it shows them that they're with somebody who's willing to listen and wants to help and is right there to help them.
Yeah, somebody who cares, who is willing to help them.
Right, thank you. Well, here's Sergeant Crawford with our first break.
Absolutely. Getting back into the music, here's Fall Out Boy on AFN. Fall Out Boy with Uma Thurman right here on AFN Casey the Eagle, where we're serving America's best. Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford here with you. And we're back with What's the Word, and here's Mr. Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. And today on What's the Word, we're talking about how to help prevent suicide. And we've been joined by our second guest during the break. He is Mr. Wayne Johnson, and he is the manager of the Army Substance Abuse Program here in Area 1. Chaplain Mavondo, Mr. Johnson, welcome to the broadcast. Mr. Johnson, if you'll just speak into that microphone there very closely, there's something that a point I'd like you to go ahead and make about the importance of asking the question directly.
Yes, when you answer the question, you never ask the question from a thinking of or those type of questions. Ask the question directly, are you going to kill yourself? Make it very precise and to the point. Are you going to kill yourself? That's the answer we should ask the person.
Thank you. I'll tell our audience, we've been talking about the three main actions to take to help prevent suicide: ask, care, and escort. And now in this segment, we look at the second of these, care. Care for your buddy. To care for a suicidal buddy, you do the following. Calmly control the situation, but don't use force. Be safe. Actively listen to show that you understand and that you care, and let the person get whatever it is off of his chest, and remove any things that he could use to injure himself. Mr. Johnson, when we say remove things that the person could use to injure himself or herself, what do we mean exactly?
I mean any possible tool, any medication, anything that you can see that a person could possibly use. A lot of times a person contemplating suicide may have a knife somewhere very visible. They may have a gun, medication, and usually some form of prescription medication. They believe that would do the job effectively and quickly. So anything you see that is visible, anything you can ask the person, do you have anything here that you are going to use? And be sure to take that and move it out of sight and away from you.
Which brings up a very important point, and that is safety, where Army ACE training tells people who want to help a suicidal person, do it calmly and also be safe. Chaplain Mavondo, what would we say to soldiers and others in our listening audience who might be in this situation? They want to help the suicidal person, and maybe the suicidal person does have a weapon. How does one address that? Keeping things calm, keeping things safe, and at the same time, if possible, getting that weapon or other dangerous object or instrument from the person.
It's important to understand that building trust between you and the person who is dealing with suicidal ideations is important. Trust is important. If you can connect with that person and build trust, it's going to be a lot easier to take away their means of committing suicide. That's why we tell our soldiers not to use force. It's not about using force. Many times I've dealt with a lot of my soldiers, and I ask them, after building that trust, connecting with my soldiers, and I let them understand, I care about you, I want you to stay alive, and I'm willing to do everything I can to do that. I would ask them, hey, I know you have a weapon on you. Do you mind if I keep that? And most of the time, once you've done a good job connecting and getting them to trust you, they will give it to you. You just need to ask, communicate with them, and just let them know why you want to take that from them. Now, because we're looking at that weapon, either a knife or an M9 and or an M4, we looked at that as that's a threat to you. You want to stay alive, and I want you to stay alive. So let's get rid of anything that would prevent us from keeping you alive. So it's very important to building trust. So you don't need force once the person is able to trust you.
Mr. Johnson, what would you add to that important part of the topic?
As the chaplain said, that trust is very important. And remember, this person is in crisis, their own crisis, and they believe that there's no means, no way that they can deal with anything. So talking, remaining calm, of course, but remember, you're talking to someone in a state that they believe the only way out is to take their lives. So very important that you consider that.
Right. Thank you. Back to Sergeant Crawford with the next break.
Yes, and I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices. Duran Duran featuring Janelle Monáe with Pressure Off right here on AFN Casey the Eagle, where we're serving America's best. Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford still here with you, and we're back with What's the Word, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. We're talking about how to help someone who's suicidal. And one of the things that we've said earlier in the broadcast is that it's very important to get the person talking, let the person get off of his chest whatever it is that's bothering him, and that makes being a good listener critically important. Chaplain Mavondo, what else can we say about that, the importance of listening properly?
Active listening is critical, and this is actually, Mr. Fisher, this is one of the most difficult things for soldiers to do, for all of us to do, because we tend to bring in other things instead of listening to the person we're dealing with. The first thing I always tell people to do is stop everything else you're doing. You can't be listening to somebody who is dealing with suicidal ideations and check your Facebook at the same time. Send messages and receive messages. You can't do that. You got to stop everything else and pay attention to the soldier you're dealing with. And also you need to listen not only to the words that are spoken, but also what we call the feeling content. There's a content there. There's something they're trying to express. You got to pay attention to that. And the third thing, you got to restate what is said. Am I hearing you say this? Or are you saying this? And you got to say it back to them to let them know, hey, I'm listening. I'm listening to what what you're saying. And then again, what we need to do is got to give him some feedback. For example, what I do, like, oh, that must be hard. That must be lonely. That must feel lonely, and kind of give them some feedback. And people, when you do that, people know, hey, you are listening to what I'm saying. You are listening to me. Actually, I've had some soldiers say, well, you are the first person actually who listened to me. Because as soon as they start speaking, the temptation is, hey, I just want to tell you what to do. I just want to give you the solutions right now instead of listening. Listening is important. And we can actually solve a lot of problems just by listening, not by offering solutions.
That's very, very valuable guidance. Mr. Johnson, what would you add to that?
Again, as the chaplain said, the nonverbal communication from the individual is extremely important. Watch the body language. Be sure that when you're interacting with that person, that it's about that person, it's not about you, and you must really hear what's being said. The key points is to repeat empathy. Repeat what the person said. Are you going to kill yourself? Yes, I am. And make sure that you're both understanding what he said so that you can move forward and get the person where they need to be.
Right. And Mr. Johnson, you were saying that make sure it's not about you. Is there the danger that somebody might begin to tell their own story to the suicidal person?
Absolutely. It's very easy to want to help that person by telling your story, especially if you had thoughts yourself at one time. But remember, at this point, it's not about you. It's about the individual who is in crisis and really is seriously in crisis, and you have to listen. You have to hear what they're saying.
And so when we say do not tell your own story, in other words, don't let the conversation go in the wrong direction and get it away from the person venting whatever they feel, whatever they need to say. But give them the floor, give them the chance to speak. But at the same time, as Chaplain Mavondo was saying, give them feedback. Pay attention. Don't even look like you're thinking about or concentrating on anything but hearing and helping them. And don't answer a text message. Don't check your Facebook. Just focus on the person. Let them talk and give them the feedback. It's acknowledge what they're saying. If they're telling you about it, having had, or maybe they're going through a really hard time, acknowledge it. Let them know that you are hearing. Copy that. Gee, that must be really lonely. That must have really shocked and hurt you when it happened to you. Things like that. Is that correct?
Absolute empathy, I believe, is the word we want to use.
Empathy, indeed. Let's also remind our audience that one of the third of the three main things that they should do in helping a suicidal person is to escort that person. Don't leave the person alone, but escort them. When we come back after the next break, we'll take a look at that. Here's Sergeant Crawford with the break.
Rihanna with What Now right here on AFN Casey the Eagle, where we're serving America's best. Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford back with you, and we're back with What's the Word, and here's Mr. Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. If you're just joining us, we've been looking today at 3 things you can do to help someone who's suicidal. And one of those things, as we've been talking about earlier, is to escort the person to a medical clinic, a chaplain, to their unit leadership. Don't leave the suicidal person alone, but escort them to where trained professionals can take it from there and help them further. Chaplain Mavando, what can we say about the importance of never leaving the suicidal person alone?
Mr. Fisher, first of all, most of us are not professionals. We got to understand that. The ACE program is actually to provide our soldiers just the basics, how to intervene. But I look at ACE as more like first responders or CPR. If you see somebody who's having a heart attack, of course you're going to intervene and provide CPR. But that doesn't mean that the person you're done with the person and you just take off and leave that person laying there. You gotta get that person to the hospital. So first responders are not the last responders. We call them first responders for a reason. But they gotta take them to the hospital, to professionals, and for continuing care. And that's why we tell our soldiers it's important. After you have asked, cared, you need to escort that soldier to somebody who has a little more training to deal with suicide, because suicide is very complicated, so they need professional help. So you don't want to leave that soldier just because you provided them with the ACE training.
Thank you. Because this is our final segment, what I'm going to do is ask each of you, I'll start with Mr. Johnson, if there is anything that you'd like to add to what we've been talking about on today's edition of What's the Word, related to helping a suicidal person. Mr. Johnson?
Again, I want to stress it is really, really important that you do ask the hard question. And the hard question is, are you going to kill yourself? Very difficult question to pose, but you must do that for the benefit of the individual. The other part of it definitely is care for that individual and be empathetic. Don't look at your own views of the world at that time. This is the views of this person's world, and it's very, very important that you show empathy.
Chaplain Mavando?
Mr. Fisher, one thing I would say is soldiers know each other best. That's important. And I believe until our soldiers understand that this is their battle, it's going to be very difficult for us to win this battle. And this is not going to be, the battle is not going to be won from our programs and training programs and from the top. It's actually from our soldiers themselves, peer to peer. We have to get our soldiers to care, understand, because soldiers know each other very well. They can recognize the warning signs. They know what their battle buddies are going through. And if they pay attention to that, it's a lot easier for a battle buddy to intervene, a private to private, than from the chaplain to the private. It's very difficult. So they eat together, they talk together, they spend time in the barracks, they spend time at work. So there are very close to their peers, and they need to get involved. This is a soldier's matter, and they need to take that as a challenge for them. And that's how we're going to win this battle against suicide.
Very important point. That's right. If you're a soldier listening to us today, to our broadcast, it's really, you are the person who's right there. You know who your buddies are, as the chaplain was just saying. You know what they're normally like, and you can tell when things are beginning to go wrong with them, and you just have to be ready to keep an eye on things. And if you think there's something wrong, go ahead and do the things that we've been talking about today to help a suicidal person. Well, 2 weeks from now, What's the Word looks at 3 key things to being healthy and fit. It's something the Army calls the performance triad. Our thanks to today's guests. They're both with the U.S. Army Garrison Red Cloud and Area 1. Chaplain David Mavondo, chaplain of the Area 1 chaplain, I should say, and Mr. Wayne Johnson, the Garrison's manager of ASAP, Army Substance Abuse Program. What's the Word airs every other Thursday at 9 a.m. I'm Frank Fisher of the Area 1 Public Affairs Office, and I've been your host for What's the Word. Handing back now to my What's the Word broadcast partner, AFN Casey DJ, Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Here's Sergeant Crawford.
Yes, and I'm Sergeant Crawford, and as Mr. Fisher said, thanks for joining us for this edition.